So thank you everybody for coming to my presentation. Today we are going to be talking about challenging behaviors in the classroom, but we're going to look at those behaviors through the view of a cultural lens. So a slightly different perspective than at least I got in my training and that the vast majority of training programs provide to teachers. And I think this is a lot more relevant than maybe we thought about a couple years ago. I feel it's always been a relevant issue that we need to start kind of standing up and taking notice of our teaching practices and the needs of the children in our classrooms. So a little bit of background about me. My name is Patricia Dulitz. I teach at Los Angeles Pierce College in Woodland Hills, California. I'm currently in a doctoral program for infant and toddler and early childhood mental health and developmental delays. And my dissertation is on challenging behaviors through a cultural lens. So I've been fascinated by the research that I've just been almost accidentally uncovering, which really led me to my dissertation topic. And I just wanted to be able to share some of the brain-based concepts that we've been discovering in my program and that my students and I have been discussing at Pierce College, and really kind of combine that with what we already know about children and what we know about behaviors in the classroom experience. So this will be as interactive as it can be with such a large group. If you have just a piece of scratch paper or something to write with on the side, it might be helpful. I will ask you to do a few activities. I am a teacher, so I will ask you to kind of follow along. And I think this will be the best way to get the most out of what we're talking about if you're kind of jotting down your ideas and kind of working along the program throughout this presentation. If you have any comments or burning questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. I am all by myself in this room, so I will do my best to talk and monitor the chat. I will do my best also to watch the clock. This is an hour-and-a-half presentation. I will do my best to make sure that we have some time at the end so I can kind of shuffle through the chat, or if you want to save your burning questions to the end, I can kind of go back in memory and we can remember what we were talking about when you had that question, and we'll hopefully be able to meet your needs and answer the questions that you might have. So without further ado, let's go ahead and start looking at the information. Just a reminder, there is a survey link that I will have posted again at the end, and I will throw that into the chat room. It is very helpful to us if you respond to the survey and let us know what worked and what didn't work for you. So I urge you at the end of the presentation, if you could please do so. That will make the next one even better and more pertinent to your information. Just a quick thumbs up if everybody is able to see my screen well. There's like 3 cameras on. So you can see my screen, and excellent. I see it all going up. And my volume must be pretty decent because you're answering my questions. Again, a final reminder that I am recording and admitting people at the same time, so bear with me. Let everybody join. So today I want to share with you the research that I've been finding about challenging behaviors. And what I'm really looking at understanding through my dissertation process is how does the culture of the school, the culture of the teacher, and the culture of the child affect the outcomes and successes for young children? And then what can we do as teachers or future teachers to address these needs? What do we need to think about in our training programs? What do we need to think about in our college programs? How can we go about understanding children's behavior? And so this is kind of the crux of the question that I want to answer, the question that I would like to kind of work through with you. I hope by the end of this presentation, you will walk away with an understanding of how to identify children's communicative intents. And we'll go over this in a little bit more detail, but basically we're looking at the concept that a child is doing a certain behavior because they're trying to communicate something to us. They're not trying to ruin our life. they're trying to communicate something and they don't have the word set or even the ability to kind of cognitively put it into an idea of why something is not working for them. Hopefully we will be able to understand and identify different cultural influences on the children that we work with and how that influences their behavior. Mostly, our research is showing that it's important for us to understand our own cultural influences and how our culture will impact what's going on in the classroom environment and our perception of the children's behaviors. We're going to look at how to reframe these behaviors, relying on the polyvagal theory in a very broad way. And then I'm hoping to get to the end and look at some practical strategies. And I'll do my best to kind of sprinkle those throughout, but they'll make the most sense if we kind of put all of these concepts together at the end of what can we do in the classroom environment when we are encountering a child who is engaging in some type of behavior that we feel qualifies as challenging. Just a reminder, I will email certificates to you. So if you haven't done so already, please put your name and email in the chat. Again, if you've done it already, don't give me double, please. But if you have not yet, if you've added late, then please make sure that your name and your email are in the chat somewhere so I can find them at the end of the meeting. So let's go ahead and start. What is behavior? What does that even mean to us? So the first thing I would like you to do, and this is where your scratch paper and pen come in handy, is I would like you to just kind of sit for a second and take that space and picture children that are in your life currently or have been in your life currently. And again, these are going to be children that had some type of behavior that we remember fondly. And just picture that child. And as you're picturing that child or children, write a couple behaviors that these children exhibited. Behaviors that pull up feelings and emotions of annoyance. They interrupted your teaching or your parenting. And these were behaviors that they just needed to go away and they needed to stop. So pulling up those types of behaviors that the child did repetitively and that you desperately needed the child to stop doing those behaviors, and just go ahead and jot those down as you're picturing the child who engaged in that type of behavior. And then look at those answers and go ahead and circle the one behavior that really just talks to you at this particular moment and that you'd like to really think about that child and that behavior through the rest of the presentation. And that's not to say that we won't think about other behaviors that we've encountered and kind of think about how this information would pertain to that child. But if we really focus in on that one child and that one behavior that one child engaged in, it's probably the one that made you want to come to this type of presentation. And we'll hold on to that child and that child's behaviors. Okay. So let's really think about what is a behavior. So again, keeping that one behavior in mind, we're going to really look at the work of Mona Delahook, who in her book, Beyond Behaviors, Using Brain Science and Compassion to Understand and Solve Children's Behavioral Challenges, she really talks about combining the idea of the polyvagal theory, which is a lot of neuroscience, and just understanding children. And she does it in a way that is very easy to approach, very easy to read, very easy to relay to parents and others who are maybe outside the field of education as well. And so Delahook talks about behavior as being the observable response to our internal and external experiences. These behaviors are outward manifestations of a person's internal body responses, perceptions, emotions, thoughts, and intentions. So what we're talking about when we say behaviors for the rest of this presentation is really what Mona Delahook identifies as the tip of the iceberg. And we talk about an iceberg as a behavioral iceberg. What we see in the classroom environment, what we see in the home environment, the hitting, the kicking, the spitting, the screaming, the refusals, that's just what we see that's above the surface of the ocean. And if you've studied icebergs at all, you know that over 70% of an iceberg is underwater. You don't see it. You just see the tip. And if we relate behaviors in the same way, we can see that behaviors that are exhibited in the classroom, the observable parts of a behavior, that's just going to be this top, this tiny little bit of why is this child engaging in this type of behavior. Underneath, we have so much information that needs to be discussed, thought about. So just really quick, because I know these are very, very small. It's the concept of, does the child feel loved? Do they feel satisfied? Do they feel confused, detached, secure, sad, connected, angry, joyful? Do they feel safe? Are they loved? Can they do things for themselves? Are they capable? Are they nourished? Are they belonging? Are they respected? Do they have power? Are they secure? Are they included? Is the child's thoughts valued? Are they understood? And do they even matter? So really, we have to understand under the waterline when we're trying to understand what is the communicative intent. Why is this child engaging in this particular behavior over and over and over again? And so Delahook talks about, what is this telling us about the child? As opposed to reacting to a child's behavior. You're ruining my day, you're interrupting my lesson, stop it. Instead of reacting, what we're asking is, how do we respond? And a response needs to be based on what's going on with the child below the waterline. So what are some of the things that typically we see in a classroom environment to address challenging behaviors? And I will use the term challenging behaviors, but in my classroom environments, and you'll hear me kind of switch throughout this presentation, the word challenging behaviors bothers me on a deeper level. If we kind of think about that concept of the iceberg, challenging behaviors really is only referring to that top portion. I prefer to think of it as a difficult moment. And if we think about that concept, difficult moment, that helps me dive beneath the surface and look at what's underneath the waterline. It's only a moment. It's not my entire day. It's not every single second, although sometimes it might feel like it. It's just a moment for this child, a difficult moment. Well, I'm a teacher. I can solve difficult problems. As opposed to challenging just feels so much more overwhelming, and challenging feels kind of in your face. Whereas a difficult moment feels like, that's what I'm supposed to do. I'm a teacher. I'm supposed to work with difficulties. So when we walk into a classroom and we're looking at how are the adults dealing with these difficult moments or challenging behaviors, the biggest problem is reward charts, sticker charts, visual tracking behavior, this red light, yellow light, green light, is really looking at eliminating a child's behavior, getting rid of it. And that's really not helping us understand, what is this child trying to tell us? It skips over the communicative intent part, and it tries to just squash it without understanding it and without really knowing, where is this behavior coming from? We've done lots of studies on children and behavior charts and reward charts and stickers and all of these behavior tracking type of things. And what we find over and over and over again is that the children that are succeeding with these types of reward charts and programs are the children who would have done it anyway for free. Stickers and rewards charts really target those children who would have behaved if you had just had spelled it out for them anyway. It's not going to capture the children who are continually violating the rules, continually kind of stepping outside the bounds of what's going on in the classroom. Those children quickly give up on these behavior charts. They feel I'm never going to get it anyway. And so the success rate for these types of charts for the children that we originally intend them for is so low, it's not really worth buying the stickers for. These are also not developmentally appropriate. And again, they're not really getting to underneath the waterline. They're not really helping us with what's going on with the child. So if we're looking at challenging behaviors in the school setting, we see that upwards of a quarter of the children in the classroom in a preschool environment are engaging in challenging behaviors. And if we look at the elementary school and secondary schools, we see that the percentages are pretty much the same, if not a bit higher. That we see teachers having to deal with challenging behaviors every single day in every single grade level from preschool all the way through. We also are looking at this concept of expelling and suspending children as young as preschool. And what we're finding in research is that it's really just teachers are not provided the adequate training and resources. We spend a lot of time talking about how to teach, but we don't spend a whole lot of time about the relationships between that teacher and the child. We don't spend a lot of time talking about behaviors and understanding why children might be doing what it is that they're doing. And so we're looking at teachers that don't have a lot of extra resources, time, money, and they're exhausted from all the work. In preschool, in elementary school, there's so many tests and standardized assessments that we're asked to engage in. We don't have kind of that extra luxury of time to be able to address these behaviors. And this needs to change. Again, as I spoke about before, if we're really looking at behaviors in the classroom environment that are challenging us, we also have to accept the idea that these behaviors are subjective. We view what a child is doing based on our own personal culture, our own personal experiences with school, personal experiences in our community, personal experiences with relationships that we have. And we look at other people's behaviors and judge them as challenging or not challenging in relationship to what we know and what we are familiar with. We have to understand that challenging behavior is subjective. It is not something that we can absolutely pinpoint. Every person is going to have a slightly different definition of what is acceptable and what is not acceptable in a classroom environment, even in a home environment. In fact, just that word challenging is all based on our own perceptions of what is risk, what is acceptable, which is the culmination of our experiences and our culture telling us what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. So we need to think about different traits that different cultures, different families might value in their own children. And so thinking about the child, but also reflecting back and thinking about our own way of interacting and our own experiences. Independent, speaking up, saying what you really mean. Are these things that are valued in your classroom? Are these things that are valued in yourself? Do you enjoy interacting with people who challenge you and ask questions? Or is it more acceptable in your mind to be around those who sit quietly and passively and never challenge what's being said by the person in authority? These are culturally based assumptions that we first have to understand within ourselves. Am I okay being challenged? Do I see that as a cognitive kind of back and forth and let's really get into this subject? Or do I see this as aggressive and confrontational and risky against me? Willingness to assert one's views can be viewed as a disruptive child, a defiant child, or an aggressive child. And we have to understand that that's our subjective, based on our culture, based on our school experience, perception. And it might be very different for the child. The child's home environment might be telling them, ask, push, question, try to move the bar, understand fully, understand with your whole body, get in there, be loud. And we have to know, is that different from my expectations of what school should be like? Young children's social and emotional development occurs over time. And again, ours does too. We have to think about the child's family and our family, the child's community and our community, the child's cultural expectations and our own personal cultural expectations. And we have to be the adults, and we have to identify, these are different than mine. These are uncomfortable for me, but is this just uncomfortable, but the child's way? And how do I make it work for the child and work for me? And this is all part of understanding culture and the beginning of really diving into our own personal biases. So let's go ahead and think about that one child and that one behavior that you are going to focus in on for the rest of this presentation. So again, please picture that child and really think about the behavior that you have already written down. Why is this behavior challenging to you? And really think about, play that behavior out in your mind. Why is it challenging? Is it hurting others physically? Is it hurting others emotionally? Is it hurting the child? Is it hurting you? Is it annoying, disruptive? What's going on? Why did you choose that particular behavior? And then after you've kind of thought about, why did I choose this particular behavior? Start trying to think about, when that behavior is happening, what are you feeling at that moment when the child is doing that behavior? Thinking about emotionally, what are you feeling? Are you feeling anger? Are you feeling frustration? Are you feeling sadness? What's that emotion? What does it trigger in you? And if you can, think about the physical reactions that your body has to that child's behavior. Does your heart start racing? Do your cheeks get hot? Do your hands clench? Do your shoulders hunch? What's the physical reaction that you have? And really try and place yourself in that moment with the child engaging in that behavior. And just really sit with it for a second and be there. And once you find yourself in that place, I'd like you to ask yourself, what are your fears for that child? Why does this particular behavior need to be corrected, in your opinion? What's really going on between you and this child? Right. I'll give you a second to be there. So this is what should lead us into really attempting to start that process to be understanding of what we call implicit bias, our personal biases. Implicit bias, everybody has. We can be the most non-racist person, we can be the kindest person, the most giving person, I treat everybody equal person. Everybody has implicit biases. And this is something that you get just from living. Your experiences accumulate and they create these implicit biases. We are humans. That's how we function. Implicit biases give us a cognitive shortcut. where we see something and we put it in a group, and then we assign that group information. All the reds, they're going to be like this. All the yellows, they're going to be like this. All the greens, they're going to be like this. Just based on our experiences, these are things I know about red, yellows, and greens, based on my life experiences up to the point that I am now. And it'll constantly change, but that is our implicit bias. That's how humans and human cognition functions. It does not mean, however, that you act on those biases. It is very, very likely that while you hold certain implicit biases, you can cognitively override those biases, that you might take that shortcut and then pause, evaluate, and make the cognitive decision to act a different way or to access more information on this particular subject, this particular child, this particular culture, this particular religion, whatever it might be. So again, I want us to understand that everybody has an implicit bias, but by saying so, it doesn't mean that you are biased or that you act biased. However, in a teaching position, it is important for us to examine what are the things I kind of rush to judgment are. What are my biases? So that I can not act on them, so that I can educate myself, so that I can pause and respond instead of react. So these personal perceptions, or these implicit biases about children and their genders and their behaviors, are based on, when we're looking at children, 3 main topics. It looks at gender, race, and physical size. And these are 3 important concepts when we're looking at teachers in a position of power in a classroom environment, working with children who might be coming from different experiences and backgrounds and cultures than we ourselves possess. So the 3 most important ones for the teaching profession is gender. Boys, girls, gender fluid. We have strong cultural expectations about what it means to be a boy. We have strong cultural expectations about what it means to be a girl. And every culture is going to have slightly different expectations. It's important to know, what are my quick shortcuts? In your culture, is it okay for boys to cry? Is that your gut feeling and then you override it? Or is that your gut feeling and you believe it? Hopefully you override it. We've had enough research on boys versus girls. What's your cultural influences telling you? What's your implicit biases about girls? What are your implicit biases about gender fluidity in children? Your community, your culture, the people you value around you have all given you messages about this. As a teaching profession, we are pretty good about examining gender. We're pretty open about it. We look at it in research. We do a pretty good job of making sure that we're not passing on stereotypes. We work on it as a profession. So let's drop down to the second one, race. This is one of those that we talk about. It's especially now probably the fancy thing to say. I do this and this and this so that I am not racist. However, as a teaching profession, we don't truly talk about race in the classroom. We find a lot of teachers who talk about, I'm colorblind, which is almost more dangerous than anything else. You cannot be colorblind. It doesn't work. Remember what we just talked about with implicit bias. You see the difference. Children as young as 3 months old see differences in skin color. You do. So then we have to look at what are our personal biases, our implicit biases in regards to different races that we see. The races that are in our classroom, our own personal, the ones we see in our community. And do the dirty work of being honest with ourselves and saying, when I see people that look like this, I immediately, my implicit bias goes in, and my cognitive shortcut tells me this about this group, tells me this about this group, and tells me that about that group. Again, it's what we do when we pause and choose thoughtfully the way to interact with that individual that's going to make the difference. But in research after research after research, teachers refuse to have this conversation. I'm really hoping after this past summer that we're starting to see that breakdown and we're actually having that conversation. But all the research that is published so far, teachers refuse to engage in this conversation. And I'm asking that we need to have those open, honest conversations. It's the only way to kind of move past this and figure out what's happening, what's not happening, and fix these. The third biggest problem is physical size. And this is more important to the preschool, maybe elementary school, the younger children. However, I think we can take this all the way up through adulthood. The bigger the person, the more aggressive they're going to come across. Even doing the same behavior that maybe a petite 5'1" woman would do, a woman who's 6'1" doing that behavior is going to be viewed as being more aggressive. A male who's big is going to be viewed as being more aggressive when he does those, as opposed to a 5'1" male doing the exact same behavior. So we can see that those children who are bigger, faster, are going to be held not only to those just implicit bias assumptions and stereotypes, but a 4-year-old who looks like a 7-year-old, there are very different developmental expectations of a 7-year-old than a 4-year-old. 4-year-olds do not have the same skill set as a 7-year-old does, but if they look 7, our implicit bias kicks in, even if they're in our preschool classroom, and we look at them and we assume they should be doing this higher set of skills. So gender, race, and physical size are 3 powerful implicit biases that we have to understand within ourselves, and then look critically in our classroom and in our school and culture and see, how are we addressing these? Are we addressing these? What kind of conversations do we need to have about these with ourselves and with our school community? If we look at gender, race, and physical size, we can see all, and I'm telling you 100% sadly, of the research shows that this affects boys and boys who are Black and boys who are Black and physically larger worse than any other racial group that's been studied. And we see this over and over and over. We see this in all age categories. We see it from the infant and toddlers all the way through to the prison system. And so we've talked a lot about, in past years, of kind of that school to prison pipeline, the preschool to prison pipeline, infancy, cradle to prison pipeline. It's not okay. And so these are the things, these are the conversations that we need to engage in. These are the trainings that we need to create and start implementing to stop that conveyor belt to prison. So these are the 3 B's of implicit bias. And I know there's a 4th. So boys. Again, boys, regardless of race, regardless of the color of their skin, boys in general, their behaviors are always rated as more aggressive and more troublesome than females, than girls. It just is. Again, as a teaching profession, we talk about it a lot and we work on ways to combat that. But boys will always be rated as being more trouble in the classroom environment. The second one is race, Black. Children who are Black are 36% more likely than to be recommended for harsher punishments, removal, than other children exhibiting the exact same behaviors. And so we can see, if we start piling it on, now we're looking at not just children who are Black, but boys who are also Black, that has just increased to a huge percentage. That just by being in the classroom, the expectations of them to be more aggressive and to be recommended for harsher punishments goes up exponentially. And then big, physical size. Children who are larger are held to higher developmental expectations. And so we can see that there's a compounded effect. And this is why we see that this huge percent of boys who are Black are punished, expelled, suspended. They talk about soft push-outs, which are almost as damaging as being suspended. So soft push-outs would be go over to the next classroom for a couple minutes, or leave circle time until you're ready to come back, go sit over there in the corner and the child can't see the book or can't see the lesson correctly, kind of exclusions from the group. Those are just as damaging as asking the child to completely leave the school. They're still missing out on that academics. We see this as kind of the big three. What I'm also finding in my research is a fourth B. Children who are brown, specifically boys, specifically children who are Hispanic. There is almost no research on this group, and the small amount of research that there is puts them in fourth place. And so we have kind of this four big groups that are in our classrooms. And we see that these are the four that are being targeted. And we really need to understand kind of what's going on with these four to be able to address these behaviors, to be able to pull them back into the system, into the school system, or improve the system around them. So really looking at, again, what is the problem? The problem is lack of training. We are not talking about this like we should. We are not providing teachers the skills. And when we're not providing the skill set, then behaviors are misinterpreted. Oops, sorry. The behaviors are misinterpreted. When we misinterpret the behavior, we react to it instead of respond to it. We attempt to change behaviors before we look at what's underneath the waterline, before we really understand what's going on with this child and what are they trying to communicate with them. The biggest flaw and assumption is that this child is choosing to behave in a particular way. When in fact, if we really kind of break it down, especially in younger children, the child is merely responding to their environment. They are lacking the skill set. They are lacking the strategies to engage as other children are engaging. And this starts in the early childhood programs. If I'm continually asking a group of children or even one child to sit on the edge of the carpet, it looks like you're not ready to be part of this. Go sit on the chair. Go outside and play until we're done with what we're doing. You're disturbing the group. The more we remove children from the learning environment, as opposed to making the learning environment work for the child, the more we're disengaging that child. The strategies that are being taught in that environment are not taught to this child who's already lacking strategies. So we're trying to change these behaviors before really understanding, why does this child have the need to engage in this behavior? And this is something that we'll talk about in a couple slides called bottom up, where the child is just responding to what's going on in their environment, responding to the stresses that they perceive. One size fits all is probably the worst concept in education, is the zero tolerance. This is what we do. There's no understanding of what's going on in your personal life. This is the response. This leaves children without any individuality. This doesn't allow for a child to need something more than the child sitting next to them, or need it presented in a different way. We know in education that every child is unique, that every child learns in their own way. Then you compound culture and life experiences on that, and then you restrict teachers and saying, there's only one response. There's only one way to teach it, and there's only one way to do that. And this is one of the big factors that contributes to children not being successful in their environments, is this idea that there's really only one way to respond to certain behaviors. We fail to really pay attention to what we know to be true and accurate. We fail to consider what is developmentally appropriate and remind ourselves that developmentally appropriate is not the same as chronologically how old is this child. Developmentally appropriate is really meaning how old is this child acting? What do they have the capacity to act? What do they have the capacity to do? So using concepts, calm down, inside voice, use your words, work, but only for those children who have those developmental capabilities. And for the most part, when we see this not working, when we see the behavior not affecting change, we have to understand that child doesn't have that skill set yet. So I have to go back and teach that skill set. Then this concept of faulty neuroception, which kind of goes into brain science, but I cross out the word faulty because again, this goes into a medical model of there's something wrong with you, as opposed to, hey, this is how your brain works. Let's take one step forward. Let's start where you are and let's go forward with what you need from me as the adult in your environment and the teacher in your environment. So we have to understand that oftentimes we're going to be working with children who are coming from different levels of trauma. The trauma might have been the teacher last year made them not like school. The trauma might be right now, the whole Zoom environment and I can't connect. The trauma might be something going on in my community, something going on at home, something going on with siblings. I mean, there's so many different levels of trauma. So I'm not really talking about anything massive. It can be small things that are just stressing the child. Even if the environment that I'm setting up is safe, it's a good classroom environment, I'm a good teacher. If that child still perceives that they're not safe, they're going to act as if they are not safe. And it's my job as the teacher to address that issue first, to make it so that child feels safe. I can't just say, hey, this is the environment, make it, kid. I need to change what I'm doing so that child feels the safety of the environment that I'm setting up. And the best way to do that is to engage in a relationship with the child, to meet them where they are and then go with them to that next step. This is one of my more favorite sayings from Ross Greene, who is one of the people I follow. Challenging behavior occurs when the demands and the expectations being placed upon a child outstrip the skills he has to respond adaptively. This is kind of the culmination of what we've been talking about. We're asking too much and we're not going to where the child is and teaching those basic skill sets. The most important thing to kind of understand when we are faced with a child's challenging behavior or difficult moment is to really understand kind of the physiological states of arousal and to understand kind of what this stress might look like. So there are 3 different pathways, and I'm going to start at the bottom pathway, the green pathway. The green pathway is the only place that a child can truly take in information, can engage in a social way, can learn. When they are in the green pathway, learning happens, social engagement happens. And this is where we're always striving to be, is regulated. When we are faced with a stressor, we can, I'm so sorry, my mouse is very sensitive. When we are faced with a stressor, we can find ourselves in either the red pathway or the blue pathway. The red pathway is much more familiar to us. It's fight or flight. So when you are faced with a bear, you either get ready to fight that bear or you get ready to run away from the bear. And this is a very primal part of our brain. It's a response to keep us alive. And we can see this happening in children. You can see them gearing up to fight, stand their ground. You can see them run out the nearest window, door, run away. And these are all bottom up. These are body reactions to stressors. Very rarely do we find a child that's engaging in this. Very rarely are we choosing to engage in a red pathway. So if we really kind of analyze and think about ourselves, first of all, the last time we were very, very upset or very, very scared, did we have cognitive control over that? Did I say, you know what? I think this is scary. Hey, heart rate, increase. Hey, skin, get hot. You know, get ready to run or get ready to fight. These things just happen to us and we respond. Sometimes we can cognitively say that was silly. That's not dangerous. And we can talk ourselves down, but we're adults and we have those strategies. So children, when stressed, might go into the red pathway. The interesting thing about this pathway is it's physical. You can feel your heart rate. You can feel your cheeks get hot. You can feel your body tense and get ready to do something big. What you can't feel is that there is a physical change to the inner ear. Our bodies go back to the primitive times and our ear canals actually change shape so that we can hear sounds of predators. Our bodies are geared to pay attention to the low rumbles of a predator, a bear, a wolf, those low rumbles. We cannot hear or process spoken human language. You can't talk to trauma. You can't talk to the red pathway. When a child or an adult is in this red pathway, there's nothing we can do with our words. And so one of the things that I talk about in my classes and one of the things that we look for in research is when we identify that this child is there. Something happened, haven't figured it out yet, but I'm working with a child who's ready to run or is ready to fight me or is fighting me. When this happens, we understand that the lower the register, the more we're going to be able to reach that child. And they're not going to be able to understand my words, but they will understand the rhythm of my words as non-threatening. And so we talk about little mantras. It's okay. You're all right. I gotcha. It's okay. It's gonna be okay. We'll get through this. We can figure it out. Whatever it is that you want to say, depending on the situation. I talk about, you say it so it works for both you and the child. So the child's having that temper tantrum. They are in the red pathway. They are full fight you mode. We say it to calm ourselves. Notice everything I said will work for me. It's okay. We'll get through this. I gotcha. We can do this. But it's also for the child. Those words will absolutely work with the child as soon as they hit the point where they can start processing human language again. I dropped my register and I went more into that sing-song kind of voicing because that's what the ear canal can process and send to the brain. And the brain can take in that information, na 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 na, na 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 na, na 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 na. It's non-threatening. And I can, whatever strategies I might have, I can pull back to green pathway and work with teacher or work with parent. Well, I'm so sorry. What we can't see all the time is the blue pathway. The blue pathway is not as well understood. It's a little bit newer to the research, and it's more difficult for teachers specifically because it's not getting in the way of my teaching. Blue pathway is the child who just shuts down. goes to a corner and falls asleep, curls up in the beanbag and falls asleep, puts their head down at the table, stops paying attention. It's difficult because they're not bothering anybody. And it's very easy to just go, oh, let them go, let them come out of it. And we have to understand as teachers who are invested in that relationship and that feeling of trust and safety and security in my classroom environment, that this child is just as bad a place as the child who's in the red pathway. And just leaving that child alone is not a relationship-based way to allow that child to deal with that all by themselves. Sitting next to them, talking, again, lower register, talking. If the child is okay with being touched, slow, rhythmic, patting on the back, those types of things will help that child regulate down into the green. But again, we have to recognize when a child's in red or when a child's in blue, talking is not going to help. Use your words is not going to help. I know the child is screaming, no, 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 I hate you, whatever they're screaming. Just because they can talk doesn't mean that they can take in the sounds of the human language. And so all of this has been talking about is body up, is really just that body reaction to something that's happening in the environment. And again, going back a couple slides, even if I know the environment's safe, it doesn't matter. The child thinks it's not safe, and so the child's going to react that way. One of the things that we have to think about, one of the things that we need to think about is that sensory preferences. We have to really think about how does the child process those senses, and this will help me. So for instance, I was talking about, should I pat the child's back? Some children find enjoyment from their back being pat. Some children can't take that personal touch, and it will send them further into the blue zone and possibly make them go into fight or flight mode. And so I need to know, how does this child process their senses? What's going to be too much for the child? What does the child need? What does the child feel is soothing? What does the child feel is overwhelming? We also engage in a lot of mindfulness activities where when the child is regulated and is in the green zone, thinking about how do we breathe, paying attention to our bodies. How is your heartbeat? How are your cheeks? What are your hands doing? Are they relaxed? Are they clenched? What are your shoulders doing? Are they clenched? Are they relaxed? Paying attention to your body and how your body's responding so that we can label those emotions and we can address them before we hit the red or the blue zones. We want to find them when we're right on the verge of the green zone and danger zones. And then most importantly, we're looking at that human connection. If I have invested the time to really analyze myself, my biases, what has my culture, my community told me is okay? What is the research showing me? What do I know about this child and this child's family and this child's community? Take that pause, share that space, and then I respond in a way that is thoughtful as opposed to a reaction that is based on my implicit biases. This next one, I think I made it a little bit messy because I'm not playing it as a PowerPoint. So let me see if I can pull it up. Okay. So one of the things that, I'll pull it out for you. When we're looking at communicative intent, so looking at what are we going to do about all of this information? How do I process everything? How do I process the polyvagal theory? How do I process blue, red, green? What's going on? Again, always go back to the iceberg. Children's behaviors often follow some pretty specific criteria. A child is doing a behavior because it soothes something internal. It meets a sensory need for them. I do it because it feels good. A lot of times we'll see children who might be on the autism spectrum or have a lot of sensory issues will engage in certain behaviors just because it feels good. So we'll see a lot of kind of the biting, those types of behaviors. Unless you are a trained occupational therapist with sensory integration, there's not a whole lot we can do about those sensory behaviors because they're internal. And anything that we do is external with the child. It's not quick enough to satisfy those needs. But if we work on all of the other areas, oftentimes this sensory will develop and the child will use cognitive functions to be able to address their sensory needs. So as teachers, we really focus on the other communicative intents. So the first one is that we would function with is attention-seeking behaviors. I do not like the idea of attention-seeking behaviors, so I'm going to get rid of that. I like to replace it with relationship-seeking behaviors and feel the power of saying this child is doing it for attention versus this child is seeking a relationship with me. It could be they're seeking this relationship through scratching me, through kicking me, through throwing toys and biting the child next to them. However, they are seeking a relationship. And as a teacher, feel how powerful just that mind switch is. Attention seeking is kind of, ugh, that kid. Relationship seeking is peaceful. I can deal with that. I'm a teacher. This child wants relationships. I too want relationships. What can I do to meet this child's needs? What can I do to make throwing these toys, scratching, biting, running away, turn into, can I play? Teacher, I need a hug. Teacher, I need help. Hi, teacher. Hi, friend. What are the steps that I need to do to go from those difficult moment, challenging behaviors so that child has the skill set to get that relationship happening, but in a socially appropriate way? So that's my biggest kind of reframe. Children also engage in behaviors to escape doing behaviors that they don't want to do. And they also engage in behaviors to get something, to get the toy, to get first in line, to get the ball that bounces the highest, whatever it might be. And so it's important to kind of think about, why might this child be doing this behavior? How's it working for them? Why are they doing this? And then we can strategize, what skill sets can I teach so that they no longer need to do that behavior? They can instead engage in something that's much more socially appropriate. So staying with Ross Green, he talks about this whole idea of reframing behavior. It's not the won'ts, but really, again, looking at below the waterline. It's the can'ts. This child somehow got to my classroom without this skill set. What can I do in this classroom environment to meet this child's skills, or meet their needs, and teach this skill set? So really looking at kind of how our internal thoughts, our implicit biases, are kind of how they're running around in our head, and watching ourselves and making sure that we're not perpetuating those stereotypes and perpetuating those biases in the classroom environment. So we talked a little bit about senses. I'm going to go through this fairly quickly. I am cognizant of the time, and we're running out of it. But we know about the 5 senses that we teach in kindergarten. Very rarely in teaching programs do we talk about, although I'm starting to see it much more, so this is a good thing, is the vestibular and the proprioceptive. And these are the two that honestly give us probably the most causes for challenging behaviors. And I could have a whole other presentation about children and the lack of being outside and the lack of gross motor skills and how that impacts the indoor learning environment, but I won't go there. But looking at the concept of vestibular, and this is just balance. This is your inner ear telling you up, down, side to side where you are in space. And the proprioceptive, which is all of your muscles and your joints, and telling you kind of that pressure. Basically, it's looking at just kind of how children are taking in the invisible part of our environment and are processing it. And if I'm constantly feeling dysregulated, then I'm not going to be able to control the behavior that I do have strategies for, let alone try and learn new strategies. My best example for these senses is we've all done college. So around this time, when all those reports are due and you have tons of studying and you have all these papers to write and you're sitting at the computer and you're typing, you're zooming, you're typing, and you just hit that moment where you're like, I have to move. I have to move. I have to get away. I have to do something. And you just stand up and you go do something. You go to the refrigerator and you get a snack. You go walk the dog. You vacuum the house. I don't know, but you move and you do something because you cannot sit in front of that computer for a second longer. Imagine that feeling all the time. All the time. And that's what we get when we're looking at kind of the vestibular and the proprioceptive input, is those children that are hanging on you, the children that are always touching, the children that are always kind of tripping in space, the children that are always wearing their shoes on backwards, the children who write too hard, write too soft. It's all of these types of things. But imagine that feeling all the time. You know what? I think I would scream a couple times too. I think I would run away too if my body was constantly move, 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 move. And so being able to recognize, maybe this child needs to move more. The eighth is fairly new. And this was developed by just recently in about 2017 by Kelly Mailer. And this is the concept of interoception. And in very few classes has this made it into the training. But we're finding more and more that this, more than use your words, more than count to 10, is kind of the key in children being able to manage those difficult moments and the children being able to regulate themselves before they hit the red or the blue zones, fight or flight or freeze. Interoception is just kind of internally, what are you feeling? And being able to recognize that. So very quickly, because I know we're running out of time, how do you know when you are, let's do happy. Let's stay with good stuff. How do you know when you're happy? What does your body do when you're happy? How would I be able to recognize you happy? What does your face do? What does your breathing do? What does your heart do? What are you feeling in your stomach? What are your shoulders doing? Are your hands light or are they tight? Really kind of doing a head to toe search of how do you know that that's the feeling that you have? My question is, do you cry when you're happy? I cry when I'm really happy. But crying is supposed to be a sad thing, right? So very confusing, especially to younger children. So you cry when you're sad, so you must be sad. No, I'm happy, but you're crying. Yeah, sometimes I cry. Very, very confusing. Even more confusing is that the vast majority of children cannot answer these simple questions. How do you know when you're hungry? How do you know when you're tired? How do you know when you're mad? What's your body doing when you're feeling these things? If I know, and I'm reminded to check in with my body, and I know that when I'm getting really frustrated, I start doing things with my hands, and that my shoulders are kind of tight, and my eyebrows get really scrunchy, And if this is kind of what I'm doing before I hit another child, before I throw a desk across the room, and I've been working on this while I'm in the green zone, somebody can ask me, what are your hands doing? What are your eyebrows doing? What feeling is coming? And then we can work on the strategies. That's when we breathe. Breathing when I'm right here is almost too late. Most of the time it is too late. A lot of times, remember, deep breaths. Take deep breaths. I'm already mad. And that's going to send me into the red zone. So again, it's the child realizing in the beginning stages, my body is ramping up. When I feel my body ramping up, I should do one of the strategies that teacher has taught me how to do to back out and ramp down. This is one of the things where culture comes into play. We as teachers cannot have an ego. We cannot say, oh, this is how it happens. This is what we do in my classroom. Too bad, kid. We have to know, you know what? This Trish, she needs more time. This Trish, it's really noisy in this classroom and she can't really process things when it's too noisy. I need to find a way to quiet this classroom down so that she has that extra second to decompress before she goes over the edge. I need to restructure my classroom for this one child. Yes, because I'm the adult in that classroom and I need to see this child's needs and I need to adjust because the child needs me to adjust. Excluding the child is not really the answer. Understanding what that child needs from me is the answer. I'm going to skip a couple slides just for time. I just wanted to point out a couple pictures. It's impossible to really know somebody's feelings just based on how they look. There's a famous Serena Williams where she just won one of the major competitions where she looks really upset, but she's really happy. This little girl looks like she could be really, really mad, when in fact the story behind this is she just learned she was getting a pony. So again, we can talk all about feelings and facial expressions, but it fails to really go down into the depths. What's your heart doing? What are your shoulders doing? What are your hands doing? How do you know this is what you are feeling? And working with the child on understanding that. So again, quote by Nyack, relationships are it. Relationships, if we invest in a relationship with the child and a relationship with understanding who this child is in my classroom, who this child is in their family, and in the larger community, most behaviors diminish. Most behaviors based on cultural misunderstanding diminish when we've invested that time to create that relationship, because the relationship itself is the safety and is the trust. And again, a lot of it is teacher ego and leaving it outside the door. I don't have all the answers. Let's work on it together, child. Let's work on it together, family. Let's figure it out, because I know my way is not the only way. My way is a way. Clearly it's not working for you, child. So I need to find a different way that does work for you and gets all of our needs met. Again, it's that safety of being invested in a relationship with each other and with an adult who you feel safe with, who you feel will listen to you, will invest the time to understand you. And research after research after research shows that this is the best strategy. It's old-fashioned, but it is the best strategy. It's figuring out who you are with that child. So again, what can we do? Relationships. It's the biggest one. How do we go about having good relationships with the child in the classroom, with the child in the family, and in the community environment? We do that by engaging in reflection, self-reflection, and being honest with ourselves and having conversations with our colleagues. Looking at things that annoy us in the classroom. or difficult moments that are, need to stop. Pausing, giving that behavior space and saying, is this really about me? Is this something that I have an issue with? Is there another way besides the way that I was taught, the way that I had when I was in school, the way I was taught in my training, the way I've been teaching? Is it possible that there is another way that's equally as good, but works better for this particular child? Is there another way to have circle time and allow children to call out, stand up and dance when they feel the need to, be more physical, and still teach what I need to teach in preschool? Is there a way to teach third grade and allow for this different body styles to happen? And I know I'm really running out of time, but I have to tell just probably one of my most impactful memories. My first year of teaching, I was teaching in a Los Angeles Unified School District school, elementary school. And there was a third grade teacher, and she was this teeny tiny little thing. She was just petite beyond petite. And I noticed that she had that classroom with those kids, that classroom. And she just had all the boys, the really active, big kids. And I was like, wow, what did she do wrong? That this principal is always giving her these just very boisterous boys. And I started watching her that first year teaching. They were always outside. She had them doing math on the kickball field. She had them reading sports biographies. She had those kids working, and they followed her around like nothing else. Their papers were all dirty and bumpy because they were writing on benches, writing on each other's backs, writing on the asphalt of the kickball field, but they were doing their math. They were reading. They were doing things. They were active. She was teaching another way. She was teaching a way that those children needed her to be. She was teaching what she had to, but she was meeting their needs to not sit for hours upon hours at a desk doing worksheets. And that was just such a turning point in me thinking about what it is to be a teacher and what it is to really have those deep relationships with students, as opposed to just turning to page 5 and doing the next lesson. The other most important part of being able and available to have that relationship with children is to be able to reframe the behavior, is to really understand, what is this child telling me? To delve underneath the waterline and to understand what's really going on with this child. Dr. Bruce Perry is big on this, reason, relate, regulate. You can look at it, but really reframing the behavior and understanding, what does this child need from me? We did it. So I'm going to take this survey link and put it into our group chat. I'll take a few seconds to just make sure that I don't have any burning questions. So somebody was asking about special needs, speech delay, developmental. All my teaching experience is with mild to or moderate to severe children on the autism spectrum. The only typically developing children I taught were, I did reverse mainstreaming with the PTA children as kind of free childcare at the elementary school. So most of my experiences are children with autism spectrum types of diagnoses, which absolutely includes speech delays. And this is why it's most important to not rely on use your words. Because if we really think about it, how many of us have words when we are truly upset or truly happy? You've had those moments where something happens and you're like, Like, we're adults and we can't even talk. So our expectations that children should be able to formally communicate, excuse me, dear teacher, I have problems with, no, it's not going to happen. So yes, special needs, oh, I don't know what my screen is going through, was founded on children who had some type of exceptionality. Absolutely works for children who are typically developing as well. I will make the PowerPoints accessible to you. Absolutely, there's quite a few people who are asking about this. So somebody asked about behavior analysis. I walk the line on behavior analysis and floor time. I find little bits of behavior analysis that aren't so terrible. And that's where you saw the sensory, attention, escape, tangible, yep. And there's parts of it that I don't think really work for the relationship part when we look at kind of applied behavior analysis, but there's little bits to everything. Again, if you walk away from this really understanding relationships and striving to understand why, throw aside our ego and really commit to what do you need from me, and asking ourselves at first, is this my problem? Am I bringing the problem to the classroom? And almost 100% of the time it is us. It's my expectations that are not realistic for this particular child. And then reframing, what is it to be a teacher? It is my job. It is my job to make sure that I change it up, or I fight the system and I change it up. Shh, don't tell I said that. And make this so that this environment does work for the child. Because we're losing too many children. We're losing them, and it's not acceptable. We shouldn't be expelling infants and toddlers. We shouldn't be expelling and suspending third graders. That's one of the last things I wanted to just kind of finish with. If we really chart that pipeline, we find that the children that are being expelled and suspended in preschool are the same ones in elementary, are the same ones in secondary. It's the same ones. If we've been expelling and suspending a child since preschool, it's not working. The punishment system doesn't work. Teaching strategies does work. Changing environments to meet children's needs does work. And we have numbers on that. So I want to thank everybody for attending. I hope this is in some way giving you a small piece of information that you can kind of take with you. Again, I will be posting this or Teach LA will be posting this on their main website as soon as I get it closed captioned. You can also find it on the Los Angeles Pierce College Child Development website as soon as I get it closed captioned. I will be writing certificates this weekend. I will send them out no later than Monday to the email. So please, before you leave, make sure you've at least once put your name and the email where you would like your certificate sent, and I will take all the information from the chat room. And I think that's about it. So thank you very much for attending, and have a great Thursday.